The Legend of Sunset Shimmer, Ocarina of Time. By Ganondorf 8. February 5, 2015. Chapter 39, Cursed Water.
Sunset Shimmer? You might want to get up now before it's too late,
said Spike.
I'd love to do that right now, but I'm just too exhausted because of all that running around. I need roughly 10 minutes of rest, and I should be good to go for a while after that,
I said.
You don't have 10 minutes because those two blue Tektites will be on top of you in about 2 minutes at the earliest,
said Spike.
If I weren't so exhausted, I would have gotten up and used the fairy bow to pick them off, but I can't even move my two pinky fingers without feeling some kind of pain. I suppose the only option I have is to get hit by those two monsters for a while until my body is ready to get back into action, but that wouldn't be the smartest recourse,
I said.
Do something,
shouted Spike.
I'm tapped, so it falls onto you to figure something out,
I said. It was rather cruel of me to leave so much pressure on Spike, but what other choice could I have done? I wasn't lying to him when I said that I couldn't move, and if I could then we wouldn't even be having this problem in the first place. In her own twisted way, Sunset Demon managed to get the last laugh on me, for I was going to be killed by lowly monsters. From the toughest battle of my entire life so far, to being defeated by weak creatures. The phrase "how the mighty have fallen" certainly comes to mind for me, but Spike wasn't about to have any of it as he decided that he was going to do something. At first I thought he was going to use that idea of his where I was going to transform of my own volition, but such a thing would be rather pointless against two blue Tektite, and that's when he came up with something really crazy.
I've got a plan which will save your skin, and give you the necessary time you need,
said Spike.
What do you have in mind?
I asked.
I'm going to be live bait,
replied Spike.
You're going to be what?
I exclaimed, but it was too late for me to say anything as Spike floated out to the blue Tektites, and started to buzz around them as though he were some kind of bee. From what I was able to see, it looked like he had finally lost his mind as this temple has been taking its toll on me as well as on him. He continued to buzz around the monsters for a few more moments before he started to fly off in the opposite direction, and hoping that they would follow and take the bait. Sure enough, they began to turn around and started to bounce after him because they found him more interesting to go after, and I couldn't help but give him so much props for wanting to do something so risky.
Have you recovered yet?
asked Spike after a while.
I still need another couple of minutes or so,
I replied.
Seriously? I've been flying around these blue Tektites for what feels like forever, and you still need more time? I don't think I can keep them distracted for much longer as they look as though they are about to turn around and make their way back over to you,
said Spike. It turns out he was right, for they noticed me on the floor again, and began to turn around and head towards me again like they were doing before.
If you're going to start moving over their Sunset Shimmer, you might want to it right now before they decide to do away with you. Sorry, but I can't move,
I said.
Guess I'll have to get them to follow me again, although I don't think they will be interested me now,
sighed Spike.
Why not use some of that fairy magic you have as a means of distracting them? They will follow you around again if they deem you a threat for attacking them, even if it is something that may or may not be capable of inflicting any damage,
I said.
For a moment there, I was thinking of coming over and bopping you on the head several times over for saying my fairy magic is useless in a fight, but then you admitted that you don't know about it, so I'm willing to forgive you there. Remind me sometime to tell you more about fairy magic whenever we get a free moment. Anyway, that's a good idea you suggested in that I use my own magic, and it will be effective as what I have doesn't fall under the same categories as regular magic,"
said Spike. He then began to throw some tiny magical bolts at the blue tektites, and they followed him again, leaving me to finish resting. One of them after a while then jumped higher than usual, and knocked him out of the sky, where he crashed a short distance away from me.
I wasn't expecting one of them to jump that high, but I've given them all I can muster as now I need to rest for a bit.
Spike then lowered his wings, which meant that he was now in the same position as I was, but lucky for the both of us that his magical attacks gave me the time I needed to finish resting.
"Okay, my 10 minutes are up,"
I announced as I climbed back onto my feet, where I did some stretches.
"Looks like my extra diversion was enough,"
laughed Spike.
"You rest for the time being, my friend, and allow me to take of this,"
I said. When I took out the fairy bow and aimed it at the blue tektites, I knew it was going to take me several attempts to hit them, as my aiming still hasn't gotten any better despite using this weapon so many times. The quiver was also low on arrows as I counted roughly 12 left, so I had to make these shots count, especially if Spike's theory regarding that block turns out to be true. It also didn't help that they were jumping up and down, and it has been a while since I shot an arrow at a moving target. As soon as they were within range, I fired a barrage of arrows, and managed to destroy both blue tektites whilst coming to an unfortunate realization.
"How many arrows did you end up using?"
asked Spike.
"All except for one, which means that I have just a single chance to prove that theory of yours," I replied. "It also means that your aim is just as bad as ever, but then I've long gotten used to that as it's a part of your charm. I'm certain that you can acquire additional arrows from smashing jars, cutting grass, and defeating enemies, so you're never really out of anything so long as you know where to look,"
said Spike.
"If it's that easy to find what you need by smashing, cutting, and slashing, I'm surprised that shops are even in business, considering people tend to go out of town to look for those items for free," I said. "Since everyone who doesn't want to spend money goes into Hyrule Field, or anywhere else where grass, jars, and monsters are plentiful, it becomes a matter of whoever gets there first ends up taking most of the good stuff with them. While many people don't really see it as being of particular significance, it's a growing trend because they aren't able to afford to buy the items. Of course, by the time they've finished harvesting what they need, most of the time they end up getting enough rupees where they can purchase whatever they want, but they don't need to, as they already got what they needed. Not everything can be found outside of towns, though, as some items are only carried by shops. Yet merchants sell their wares to people who live in towns and cities, as they would never leave their comfort zone, and resort to the adventuring lifestyle," said Spike. "It sounds to me that Hyrule certainly has problems when it comes to the economy," I said. "You get used to it after a while, as it becomes natural. By the way, would you carry me around for a while, as I'm still recovering from having the wind knocked out of me? I'll still be able to provide you with advice, but I need somewhere to rest until I have the strength to fly again," said Spike. I walked over to him and carefully picked him up using my one free hand, as the other was holding the fairy bow, and I placed him gently into the rim of my hat so that would remain warm. I said that I would be walking slowly so as to not startle him, but Spike insisted that I keep on going at my normal pace, and that he would be okay. "Now, we need to make our way around to the east side of this floor, as that is where we should find that one gate we couldn't access before. I remember seeing that just around the corner," I said. "We had to ignore it last time as you were carrying around the hook shot, and its chain wasn't long enough for you to reach over to the plate on the wall. If I remember correctly, there was an eye switch in front of the gate where it was protruding just below the ledge. Hitting that with the one arrow you have left will open the gate, but you'll likely need to be quick before the gate closes again," said Spike.
"What if I miss the switch?" I asked.
"Then be prepared to backtrack to find some more arrows, for we can't proceed to that block unless you hit the switch with an arrow, so I hope that you don't mess this up,"
replied Spike. If that wasn't his way of giving me even more pressure, then I don't know what is. He was right though in that I needed for this to work, otherwise I'd have to spend time trying to find more of them, and that could take who knows how long. Walking around the corner led me to the gate where the eye switch was located as Spike said, so now I needed to concentrate harder than ever before if I was to hit the target.
"I'd say that you will have about 5 seconds to pull yourself through that passageway before the gate closes, so you'll need to quickly switch from one weapon to the next without fumbling. You know, maybe I should consider finding a larger quiver if such a thing exists,"
I said.
"They do exist, although how to obtain one does pose a difficult question," said Spike. "Where can I get my hands on one?"
I asked.
"The shooting gallery which used to exist in Hyrule Castle Town before it was all destroyed by Ganondorf, and has since been relocated to Kakariko Village, should have one available as it's famous for challenges involving the use of slingshots and bows. Originally, it was a place restricted to just adults, but when kids came around with slingshots and requested to be permitted to play there as well, the owner created challenges just for them, and so his business has gotten even better. As for the possibility of there being a second quiver out there, I'm not sure where you would find one unless you were to look in the least likely of places," replied Spike. "Remind me to pay a visit to this shooting gallery, as this is the second time I've run out of arrows, and I'd rather not experience it for a third time. I should have enough rupees to play these challenges, so we'll go there whenever we next visit Kakariko Village,"
I said. Once I took some quick breathing as my way of concentrating, I aimed the fairy bow at the eye switch really carefully, and took as many steps as I could to the edge of the ledge. When I was unable to step any further without walking off and into the water, I fired the arrow and hoped it would hit its target, as I didn't want to have to go exploring, but luckily for me the arrow hit the switch, causing the eye to close, and the gate to rise up. Quickly, I put the bow away and took out the long shot, and aimed for the plate that was on the wall in the distance. Since time was against me, I wasn't able to properly aim, so instead it all came down to pure instinct, and hoping for the best.
"Did we make it?"
asked Spike a few seconds later.
"Somehow we made it to the other side of the gate before it closed behind us, and I didn't even take the time to adjust my aiming when I used the long shot. There is no switch on this side for me to hit in order to open the gate again, and even if there was I couldn't activate it due to now having no arrows in my quiver. I'm just hoping that there won't be any puzzles coming up in the remaining rooms that require the use of arrows, for we'll be at a complete loss if such a thing were to happen,"
I replied.
"Then let's hope that you can find some jars that contain arrows when you smash them," said Spike.
After putting the long shot away, I walked around the next corner where I soon came upon the block which I pulled before until it got stuck due to the ceiling being too low for it to be pulled any further. Upon taking a closer inspection at it, I found it had been covering up something, as I could just barely make out what appeared to be a room. So when I started to push the block along using what little I had when it comes to strength, it scraped along the floor until it lodged itself perfectly into the wall, revealing a small treasure chest in the nook it was covering.
"Now you can see why we needed to lower the water level to the bottom, and then raise it back up halfway again before we could come back here," If I had attempted to solve this puzzle without draining the water, it would have been impossible as only the long shot can be used underwater. I've got to give the followers of Ganondorf some credit here for hiding these small keys really cleverly in places you would normally never consider,
I said.
Would that be the only credit you can give them?
Asked Spike.
Pretty much as what they've done to the people in the name of their leader is beyond forgiveness,
I replied.
Still having some regret over the she-demon?
Asked Spike. This was quite the question coming from him out of nowhere, and it caught me off guard because I wasn't expecting him to ask it. Just him mentioning the words she-demon made me start to think about the emotional consequences of what happened, and that I was much more conflicted than even I originally believed myself to be. While I had finally felt that I was now able to move on with my life, something was holding me back, and I couldn't seem to get it out of my mind. Could this be a form of guilt? I had robbed a creature the chance of acquiring a life of her very own, yet she desired my life despite being the darkness that existed in my heart. Personally, I didn't want to talk about it so soon after the immense battle, but how could I refuse a question like that, and coming from the one person who has been there with me from the beginning? After thinking it over in my mind for a few seconds, I decided to answer Spike, and perhaps get some issues off of my chest.
I'd lying to you if I said that it wasn't bothering me,
I replied.
You did what you needed to do to defeat her, and finally overcome something from your past which weighed you down. Granted, you had to reluctantly transform to prevail, but there was no other choice as you wouldn't have defeated her otherwise,
said Spike.
I've gotten over the whole transformation aspect of it because I realized that doing so was a necessary evil, but that isn't the problem that's been bothering me. While I had to defeat Sunset Demon in order to progress through the Water Temple, and perhaps finally move on with my life, I just wish that there had been another way to resolve things,
I said.
What do you mean?
Asked Spike.
If she had been more willing to talk things out instead of wanting to fight and kill me to achieve her goal, the entire situation could have been avoided altogether, and she might have discovered that she needed to live out her own existence. Instead, I have denied her the chance to realize her dream, even if it mean my own dream coming to an end in that sense of it, so now I am feeling guilty that I chose to slaughter her without mercy. Back where I come from, I was only starting to understand the concept of friendship, but now I feel like I know even less about it than before due to what I ended up doing to my other self. It's not her fault that she desired revenge and was willing to do whatever was necessary to fulfill her bloodlust,
I replied.
Does it have to do with the fact that you yourself were once her?
Asked Spike.
Even though it happened years ago, I can't help but beat myself up over how stupid I was for thinking I could go off on my own, and find my own way with such a corrupted heart. Princess Celestia believed that I could become an ideal student under her wisdom, but I was too impatient and sought a faster means of achieving my goals. As you saw with the she-demon, my method wasn't exactly the best thing in the world. Still, all of that hatred she had was because I had that very hatred in me, and I often vented out my frustrations in the form of intimidation whenever I didn't get my way. Sunset Demon basically represents the worst qualities of my personality, and manifests them into a horrible creature who wields the same power as I do. And then some,
I replied.
And then some?
Asked Spike.
Did I ever tell you why I ended up becoming Sunset Demon?
I asked.
You never really explained it other than you were defeated, and after that began to change your ways,
replied Spike.
I suppose it's because I'm ashamed to reveal what I did, for it's another reminder of who I used to be,
I said. Before I continued with the explanation, I walked over to the treasure chest, and kicked it open to reveal a small key. As soon as I pocketed the key and making sure that nothing had been left behind, I revealed to Spike the reason as how I became the she-demon.
You see, I returned to my place of birth, Equestria, sometime after my own self-exile to the human world, and stole a crown which belonged to my friend, Princess Twilight Sparkle, yet this was before we were friends, mind you. Anyway, I brought her crown, known as the element of magic, to the human world, and that's how the rest of my friends acquired equestrian magic. My aim was to wear it upon my head, and use its power to become the ruler of Equestria.
You must have had some issues back then, said Spike.
Don't I know it, but the crown was something meant only for the one connected to the element of magic, and that was Twilight, for she was destined to possess that element,
I said. That's when I looked at my right hand, and it shivered because my thought process was reminding me of what I aspired to do before I changed. While I consider myself lucky to have been given a second chance, the idea of me not being given one and instead remaining isolated and alone made me close my eyes and shake with fear. What if I hadn't been worthy enough to be given forgiveness? What if my friends couldn't defeat me and instead had to bow down to what I had become? Spike noticed that I was having some kind of nightmare, and he comforted me by saying that things worked out in the end, and it gave me the confidence to continue.
When I wore the crown, I absorbed the negative powers it possessed, which reflected in my own negativity, and that's how the she-demon was created. What kind of power did you have?
Asked Spike.
I had my own equestrian magic, although it had been twisted to become dark magic,
I replied.
And?
Asked Spike.
I remember being able to hypnotize people, and I used such a power on the student body of Canterlot High to make them my slaves, where my plan was to invade Equestria using them as my soldiers. That's pretty much all I know, for I didn't have that form for very long, and for that I should be thankful.
I replied.
It looks like being here in Hyrule has given your dark side additional powers, said Spike. But that is something we don't need to consider anymore, because she has been destroyed once and for all,
I said. My way of thinking was sheer ignorance, because I never took into consideration what Sunset Demon said before she shattered to pieces, and that was saying it wasn't over between us. To say something like that meant that she planned on returning, and her defeat was merely a ruse so as to throw suspicion away from her.
Anyway, I think I've explained things with as much detail as I'm willing to discuss. I was thinking of checking the dungeon map again in order to see where we haven't been to yet, for I believe that there are only a few rooms left before we can officially say we've combed through every last chamber. In case you were wondering, the map in the water temple is indeed waterproof, otherwise it would have crumpled to pieces. Now, if I remember where we've been in this giant maze of a dungeon, I think there is one passageway we never checked out. It's not the one that Princess Ruto said for us to avoid, as it just leads to a lengthy room which comes to a dead end,
said Spike. I took out the map and began to comb over it to see what was left, and sure enough there were a series of rooms on the first floor which we haven't been to yet. Perhaps the most important thing among those rooms was the icon indicating that there was a treasure chest there, and it was also the only remaining chest in the temple.
The boss key must be there in that room, as there are no other chests left,
I said.
It makes sense for it to be hidden all the way over there out of the main areas of the temple, and according to the map, there is a passageway on the first floor which goes in that direction,
said Spike.
I wonder why we never bothered to check it out before,
I asked.
We decided against it due to Princess Ruto having gotten frustrated with how we used that rupee to determine which way we were going to go next, but maybe we should have taken a quick peek at the time in order to get the lay of the land, so to speak. All you need to do to reach that passageway is to drop down to the lower from here, and make your way north. But then I forgot that we can't go back the way we came, as there is no switch to open that gate from this side,"
replied Spike.
"There must be another way out of this room, otherwise we're trapped in here,"
I said.
"You do have that warp point, you know,"
said Spike.
"We're not going to be using that until we reach the room with the boss key in it, as that would be the perfect place to warp back, so I think we can find a proper way out of here without relying on Farore's wind," I said.
It wasn't easy to find a way out of the room because everything looked exactly the same, but then I remembered that I dropped down into this room from the 3rd floor, so I traced my steps back to that exact location, hoping for a means of escape. It turns out there was a hook-shot plate on the wall which must have been placed there in case someone needed to get out of this area without the water being there. Taking out the long shot, I aimed for the plate and pulled myself up to the edge, and grabbed it before climbing back up.
I knew there had to be a means of escaping without relying on magic. "Call me impressed,"
smiled Spike.
"Why do you say that?"
I asked.
"You figured that out on your own without my help, and to be honest, I had no idea that hook-shot plate was there. I guess using Farore's wind again would have been pointless given that the warp is just around the corner, and it would have been a waste of magic to simply warp such a short distance,"
replied Spike. It sounds like I appear to getting a little better, although I would say otherwise, as much of the time I happen to be either lucky, or just blunder my way through any given challenge. I once again switched to the iron boots and dropped down into the water, but I forgot that it hadn't been raised all the way, so for a brief moment I was falling through the air before splashing into the drink. Upon landing on the ground underwater, I made my way to the north passageway, where I immediately fell into another hole the instant I entered it. This new direction quickly opened out into a large room, and I could see a row of spikes sticking out on the edge above the water.
"Those look to be rather difficult to get across,"
I commented.
"It should be easy as you have the long shot, and I guess coming here earlier would have let us realize that. The hookshot's chain wouldn't have been long enough to reach the plate at the time, so we had to come back with the upgrade before gaining access to the remaining rooms,"
said Spike.
"When you think about it, the extended chain doesn't get used quite as often in this temple as you think,"
I said.
"Probably because by the time you found it, we were more than halfway through with the exploration. It only seemed to take longer because the she-demon took up a lot of time given what happened back there. Since there are no hook-shot plates for you to pull yourself towards right above us, the only option is to switch back to your regular boots, and climb onto that ledge up there behind you,"
said Spike. I switched boots again, and floated up to the surface, where I climbed out and turned around to see a locked door in the distance. The plate in question was located above the door, so I took out the long shot and aimed it at the plate, where I launched myself across and over the spikes. When I landed, I noticed that there was another plate located on the opposite side in the same general location.
"Why is that one there?"
I asked.
"If you decide to come back to the central chamber by going the long way, you need to use that plate to pull yourself across like you did just now. Those spikes cannot be jumped over by regular jumps as they are too high and too long in width, and if you tried to make such an attempt, I think you get the idea as to what will happen. In any case, let's see what lies beyond this room,"
replied Spike. Unlocking the door and entering the next room, I found myself staring at a large pool of water where vortexes were flanking the sides, and numerous blue tektites were floating on top of the water. Boulders were rolling out of what looked like chutes and along the bottom of the pool, and there appeared to be an opening to the left which was too high for me to reach.
Now I wish that I didn't run out of arrows,
I moaned.
There are no jars for you to smash, so it looks like you'll need to do this the hard way,
said Spike.
Just what I'm not looking forward to,
I moaned.
The vortexes won't be a problem if you swim through the middle as fast as you can, but make sure those blue tektites don't hit you, otherwise you'll get pushed back and get pulled down into one of those vortexes where it will be the end of us. The boulders will do the same thing if they roll into you, so you need to be careful as you make your way across. Arrows would have made it easier as you could have picked off the monsters one by one, but you don't have anything else that can hit them from a distance,
said Spike.
What about using my water magic?
I asked.
I keep forgetting that you have other magical elements besides fire,
replied Spike.
Since I've only been relying on the hook shot/long shot for the majority of the time, I only used water magic in here once against blue tektites back when we first entered the temple, although that involved using the megaton hammer afterwards. I think this room would be a good place to try that magic again, and it could be one of the few times I do get to use water magic. Face it, water only exists here, in Zora's domain, and Lake Hylia on a massive scale, and anywhere else in the kingdom is going to be lacking in it. No offense to the Great Fairy of Power, but maybe she didn't take into consideration that earth, wind, and water forms of magic aren't as usable as fire,
I said.
Fire has restrictions too, you know,
said Spike.
True, but don't forget that fire is my natural element, so those restrictions don't apply to me. Anyway, I want to try something here, and I need to have the utmost concentration as I have no idea if this will even work,
I said. Closing my eyes and pushing my arms forward as far as possible, I began to concentrate my magical powers on the water. To be more specific, I was focusing on the vortexes as they were the key to my idea. After a couple of minutes of focusing my efforts, I opened my eyes and began to pull the vortexes towards the blue tektites as though they were tornadoes, with the intent on pulling them in, and defeating them that way rather than risk being overwhelmed were I to swim across. It was pretty difficult as I was manipulating a lot of water, and this was something which I've never done before, but it felt like I was being guided along by an invisible presence which wanted me to succeed. The blue tektites had no chance of escaping as the vortex tornadoes pulled them along and into the holes where they disappeared, leaving me to swim across with only the boulders being a problem.
That was amazing!
exclaimed Spike.
Not to mention really taxing,
I added as I dropped to the ground.
Don't tell me you need to rest again,
asked Spike.
Having to manipulate all of that water really took its toll on me, as it's something I've never attempted before, and I actually believed that my idea wasn't going to work because of my lack of knowledge of water magic. And yet, I felt a presence guiding me which enabled me to succeed. It felt like Princess Ruto was helping me from her current location, wherever that is. I just need to rest for a few minutes, otherwise I'll overexert myself. And you know what happened back in the central chamber,
I said. This time, I only needed 5 minutes as the magic was more of a mental strain rather than a physical one, and when I was fully recovered, I jumped into the water and swam as fast as possible while avoiding the boulders. The swim across wasn't so bad now that the blue tektites were out of the way, and when I reached the other side of the pool, I climbed up onto the ledge and opened the door. In the next room, I found myself staring at what looked like a large pit of some kind, but as I moved closer to the edge, I saw that it was a small pool of water with platforms on either side of it.
There's some kind of switch there in the water, but I can't tell what color it is from here,"
said Spike.
"Do you hear something squeaking?"
I asked.
"I'm not sure if that would be the sound that they are making, but something is swimming about in that pool down there. They look like those stinger monsters we encountered all the way back when we were exploring the innards of Lord Jabu Jabu,"
replied Spike.
"What could they be doing here of all places?"
I asked.
"I don't know, but clearly they don't seem to fit in with the dynamics of the temple. Unlike the ones we encountered 7 years ago, these ones aren't able to hide underwater, and it looks like they will try to leap out of the water and slam into you before turning around and jumping back in again. Arrows aren't going to be useful here despite you not having any on hand because the stingers are moving too fast, so you'll need to find some other way to defeat them. Which means using your water magic again,"
replied Spike.
"Might as well use said magic in the ideal place where it works,"
I smiled. Since the water in this room wasn't as big as in the previous one, I wasn't going to be exerting anything, so I won't be needing to rest after this one. Pushing my arms forward again followed by closing my eyes, I concentrated, and a large tornado appeared in the middle of the water which pulled the stingers into it. After they swirled around in the vortex for a while, they went scattering all across the room where they slammed into the walls and disappeared, which was the sign that they had been defeated, and once the last one was gone, I allowed the vortex to recede and the water to return to normal. With that problem out of the way, I jumped down so that Spike could take a closer look at the block underwater.
"It looks like a large blue block, so you'll need something heavy to press it down." "Where are we going to find a heavy object?"
I asked.
"There has to be one in this room, and it's probably hidden behind a false wall,"
replied Spike. I turned around to begin searching, and immediately I found a crack in the wall behind me, and there was something on the other side. Taking out my bomb bag, pulling out a bomb, and placing it on the ground in front of the wall, it exploded a few seconds later, revealing a hidden passageway. It wasn't really much of one, as upon turning the next corner, I was stuck with a block literally blocking the way, but then I began to see what needed to be done to activate the blue switch.
"Guess this must be the heavy object we're looking for,"
I said.
"If you pull it towards you, it can be dragged along until you reach the wall, but then you'll need to push it from the other side. If that's the case, then there must be a second false wall which can be destroyed with a bomb,"
said Spike.
"Most likely where that other walkway is on the opposite side of the pool, but I'm not going to be enjoying this as I'll have to get in and out of the water a few times just to push and pull this block to where it needs to go. Sometimes, I do wish that there was an easy way to do these things, but then doing so would deprive me of the challenge necessary to test me as the hero."
I sighed. Making my way over to the other side was indeed a chore, as jumping into the water and climbing back out repeatedly was going to exhaust me yet again, and it reminded me as to why I am not enjoying the experiences of this temple. The wall, which needed to be blown up, looked real at first, but I noticed that the bricks on the false part don't match up with the real integrity of the wall, so by placing another bomb down and destroying the wall, it revealed the other side of the block.
"At least know that we're almost done here,"
said Spike.
"Yeah, but I still don't like having to do this,"
I moaned. Pushing and pulling the block along its intended route wasn't bad, as it was surprisingly light for its size, but the problem again was having to go in and out of the water just to get the block onto the switch. Before making the final push, I decided to see what was inside of the jars just in case there were arrows, which I desperately needed, and when I smashed them, arrows fell out, and that put a smile on my face.
"Arrows. There may be only 10 of them here, but at least I have some to use."
With that done, I pushed the block onto the switch which activated it, and it caused the water to rise up, which made me feel uneasy until I realized that it was necessary to reach the door that led to the next room.
"We still haven't used that last small key,"
commented Spike.
"I have a feeling that whoever locked certain doors in here wanted to give any potential explorers a kick to the stomach by placing a locked door right in front of the room which contains the boss key, and that would be a cruel twist of fate as we'd be forced to backtrack for a while before coming back here again,"
I said.
"Good thing we checked out all of those hidden nooks like you suggested,"
said Spike.
"I'm really getting the hang of it when it comes to searching for items, but I don't like having to do so much grunt work,"
I moaned. That response got a chuckle from Spike, and it was good to see him in such high spirits after what he has been through. I asked him if he had fully recovered, and he said that he had been fine for the last 20 minutes, but he felt so warm and comfy in the rim of my hat that he wanted to stay there. You'd think I'd be annoyed with that, but I wasn't, for instead I said he could stay there as long as he wants until we reach the location of the curse. Opening the door and entering the next room, I had a strange feeling that I've done this before in a previous room.
"Didn't we have to solve this puzzle earlier? The only difference this time is that there are 3 geysers down below instead of 1, so you'll need to hop from each one to get to the other side. The water will only rise up when you activate that crystal switch over there, and then we have 2 blue tektites waiting over there. Since you just got some arrows in the other room from those jars, you can either pick them off from this side, or hit them once and let them jump into the pit below. Just be careful not to fall in yourself, otherwise you'll have to fight them,"
replied Spike.
"I can see a hook-shot target below my feet, so this is pretty much the same puzzle only with more jumping,"
I said.
"At this point in the temple, it shouldn't be a disappointment as it could have been something else,"
said Spike.
"I'll gladly take a puzzle like this instead of pushing blocks, swimming around, and backtracking constantly,"
I said before taking out the fairy bow and aiming it at the 2 blue tektites. Since neither of them were moving, it should be easy enough for me to hit them, but of course saying that is one thing, and actually succeeding at it is a completely different story altogether. My first 2 shots completely sailed over them and ended up hitting the door, so that was embarrassing to say the least, but then the 3rd shot hit the one on the left and it jumped into the pit, leaving me the other blue tektite to deal with. Arrow number 4 somehow hit the wall below where it was standing, yet the 5th one struck home, and it too jumped down because it was blinded with revenge.
"You really do need to get better with the fairy bow,"
commented Spike.
"Were my shots really that bad?"
I asked.
"You hit the door at the end of the room, and you hit the wall below the ledge we need to reach. Yeah, I'd say those were pretty bad shots, and I didn't think anyone with a bow would end up hitting a door of all things. Still, you didn't give up and accomplished the goal of getting the blue tektites into the pit and out of the way. I think the owner of the shooting gallery will definitely teach you how to effectively use the bow, for I know he will be surprised if he saw how you use it,"
replied Spike.
"At least I didn't waste all of my arrows as I still have 7 left in the quiver,"
I said. Putting the bow away and taking out the long shot, I fired it at the crystal switch which raised the water of the 3 geysers, and allowed me to make my way across, all the while having to hear that ticking sound. Once I reached the other side, I opened the door and found myself in a short passageway that looked simple enough.
"I don't like how easy this room appears, and it's making me feel nervous." "Be prepared for anything,"
said Spike. All of a sudden, a large boulder rolled past which startled me, so I quickly took out the dungeon map to see where we were, and it turns out that this was the same room where I used those vortexes to defeat those blue tektites. What we witnessed was one of the chutes where the boulders roll along and into the water where they serve to disrupt my momentum. Spike wanted to see the map for a second, so I raised it up to him and he glanced over it.
We need to head to the right in order to reach the room containing the boss key, so it looks like we'll have to avoid the boulders and make our way up the chute. Before I go gallivanting off in a direction where giant rocks will try to bowl me over like I'm some kind of pin, why don't we take a closer look at where they're coming from,
I suggested.
Do you have a theory?
Asked Spike.
As a matter of fact, I do, which is why we should look,
I replied. Walking a few steps forward until I was as close to the edge as possible without getting hit by the constantly rolling boulders, I looked to the right and there was a small waterfall where the boulders were rolling down from the top, and below was a hole which dropped down to an underwater passage.
I suspected there was more to this than simply walking up a chute, so all I need to do is switch boots and jump down before I get flattened and quite possibly pushed back to the previous room.
After switching to the iron boots, I decided to wait for roughly a minute in order to see how often the boulders rolled down from the top of the waterfall, and I calculated it to be one rolling by every 15 seconds. As soon as the next boulder rolled by, I quickly ran as fast as I could and sank down just as the next one was about to land on my head.
Looks like your feeling regarding the use of the last small key turned out to be correct, said Spike. If we hadn't picked up the one in that funny-shaped room, we would be backtracking right now, I said. All that's left is to walk through this passageway, and we're home free as you'll use Faro Ray's wine the moment you claim the boss key in the next room after unlocking the door,
said Spike.
Of course, as I have no intention of walking all the way back to the central room, so we can skip all of that and make our way to the source of the curse the moment we come out of the warp,
I said.
Actually, you will need to do one last bit of backtracking,
began Spike.
Come again?
I asked.
The hookshot plate that was on the statue in front of the door that leads to the boss room is currently inaccessible, and the only way to access it is to raise the water level to its original position back when we first entered the temple. In other words, we need to go back to the third location, and play Zelda's lullaby before we can progress to the final room,
replied Spike.
I am really disliking the structure of this place,
I moaned. Just when you think I couldn't stand much more, walking around the next corner revealed a single shell blade which was blocking my path. It hadn't noticed me yet, so its vision must be pretty bad, but I had to move in closely and strike with the long shot because the passageway was too narrow to allow for anything in the way of maneuverability. I took out the long shot as well as the Hylian shield and prepared to move in, and that's when something else came to mind. How does the shield keep on ending up on my back whenever I am done using it for a given task? Yet another question of this world which confuses me to no end. The instant I got within range of the shell blade, I aimed for its mouth and it opened up revealing its muzzle, and I fired striking it and defeating it, which was a sigh of relief as I didn't want to be dragged into an unnecessary battle. With that out of the way, I walked forward a little more before switching boots and climbing out of the water when I reached the surface. As I originally suspected, the final door was locked, so if I didn't have the key, this is where I would have freaked out. But I do have it, so I unlocked the door, and in the next room was the gold and blue ornate chest, whereupon opening it, I took out the boss key, which meant I was finally done.
Now we need to make our way back to the central chamber,
said Spike.
And that's where Faro Ray's wind comes into play, as we'll be warping to where I created the warp point, but I haven't exactly used the second half of the spell before, so I have no idea how I'm supposed to do this,
I said.
First of all, you need to take out the gem that houses Faro Ray's wind, and then you need to tell it that you want to go to the warp point you created earlier. There is no magic power being spent here as it was used to cast the spell originally, but there is one more thing you need to know. When you use the spell for the second time and go to the intended destination as designated by the warp point, it will disappear, so if you want to warp again in the future, you'll need to create a new point,"
said Spike.
"It's kind of like a one-trick pony," I said. "Nice reference to your kind,"
laughed Spike.
"And it wasn't even intentional," I added.
Taking out Farore's wind in the form of a gem, I told it that I wished to be warped back to where I created the point, and in a matter of moments, I found myself back on the third floor, although the flash of light was something I could have done without. It did take me a moment to reorientate myself, as warping does leave you feeling frazzled, and I proceeded to the final chamber. But first I had to do some more unnecessary backtracking. This involved dropping down to the lower level, and going through the formerly locked door, and up and around to the third location where the water level can be changed. This little detour took me a few minutes to get through, and it did involve another blue tektite blocking the way, which I destroyed instantly as I wasn't in the mood to be delayed any more than I was. At the location, I played Twilight's Lullaby, which raised the water level, and the statue also raised up, revealing the hook-shot plate on the front of it. With that taken care of, I jumped down and swam over to the part of the walkway that was the closest to the statue where I took out the long shot, and pulled myself over.
"Well, we have just one room left before the boss room," said Spike. "I wonder what kind of final obstacle has been set up in order to stop us from progressing any further?"
I asked. Opening the door and walking into the next room, I was shocked to see that the last line of defense was a single slope with 3 spike traps bouncing back and forth against the walls.
"Weird. I actually wasn't expecting something like this, but I can see how it would prevent anyone from getting up to the top. Since there are no hook-shot plates to be found, the only option to take is to run up the slope, and avoid getting hit by the traps, although it does seem a bit difficult to avoid them. If one of those traps hits you, it will cause you to lose any momentum you had, and you'll slide all the way back down again to the bottom of the slope. There is a way to avoid them altogether, and that involves running up next to the wall. However, the trick is to time it just right before starting to run up, otherwise you'll get injured as well as frustrated. Just watch the first 2 carefully, as the third one is probably the easiest one to avoid,"
said Spike.
"Which side do you think works best?"
I asked.
"Either side will work, but go with whatever you feel comfortable with,"
replied Spike. I wanted to do this on my first try, not only because I didn't want to get injured by these spikes when I'm so close to the end, but also for wanting to do something without blundering it up, such as what I've done whenever I used the fairy bow. Watching the traps closely with my eyes and waiting for the right moment wasn't easy, but I was able to find a weak spot in their movement, which I capitalized by running up the slope as fast as my legs were able to carry me. I even had my eyes closed as I just wanted to make it to the top in one piece, and I surprised myself by accomplishing that goal.
"That was easy," I said. "But what lies beyond this door isn't going to be," said Spike. "Just the thought of having to deal with that watery tentacle which kidnapped Princess Ruto earlier is making me feel uneasy, but we have to go in and take it down if we want to rescue her and save her people," I said.
Taking out the boss key and using it to open the door, the next room was a large chamber that had spikes lining around the edge, and a walkway surrounded a large pool of water. In the middle of this pool were 4 platforms of the same shape and size, with each sporting ladders, and finally there were various hook-shot plates scattered around the walls.
"There's something unusual about this room, Spike," but I can't put my finger on it. Be careful, Sunset Shimmer. That isn't normal water over there,
said Spike.
It looks fine to me, I said. Don't let appearances deceive you, not even for an instant. The color of that water is different from what we've seen throughout the temple, and I am sensing an evil power coming from it. This could be the source of the curse itself, and that some other creature is using it to make the Zoras suffer, or it could be something else completely, which means be prepared for anything,
said Spike. He then finally got off of my hat as he said that he wanted to be at his best to assist me in whatever has to be done in this room, but the question is, what am I supposed to do? I can't go back as the door I entered is locked, and nothing has shown up to attack me, so it feels like we're all alone in here.
Why don't you jump over to one of those platforms and take a closer look at the water? I know that I said that it's evil in nature, but I don't see anything else we can do.
Guess I've no other choice, I said as I walked to the edge of the pool and jumped to the platform to my right, and took a closer look at the water. It did look evil from what I could see, but at the same time it looked just like ordinary water but with a different color. What I didn't notice was that something was lurking underwater, and I had awoken it from whatever it was doing. It noticed Spike floating in the air, and began to move slowly so as to not elude me to its presence. When it ended up behind me, it began to rise up as a means of preparing to attack, and I was still unaware of what was happening behind my back.
Spike? Do you hear something gargling? It sounds like it's coming from behind us,
replied Spike.
I don't want to know what is making that sound, but I have to look,
I sighed. The instant I turned around, my jaw dropped in shock as what I was seeing with my own eyes was the watery tentacle that abducted Rarity, but it also had some kind of strange pulsating orb flowing about. As soon as the tentacle dropped down into the water, the orb began to bounce all over the place until it started to spin around in a circle numerous times, and within a matter of moments, it had created a whirlpool which produced another tentacle. I couldn't do anything because I had no idea what I was up against, but I should have at least jumped to the walkway instead of standing still, for the tentacle grabbed me when it lunged forward in my direction. For the next few moments, I found myself being swung back and forth by this thing, and when it was finished with me, I was thrown all the way to the other side of the room where I landed mere inches in front of the spikes.
Are you all right?
Asked Spike.
I knew we were going up against some kind of water creature, but I wasn't expecting to see something like that,
I replied.
That creature is known as Morpha, a giant aquatic amoeba which serves as the master of the water temple, and is the source of the curse which has been afflicting both Zora's domain and Lake Hylia. Even though it looks like the entire body of water is what it looks like, in truth the nucleus, that orb which splashes about without a care in the world, is Morpha's true form, which makes it perhaps the smallest creature we've encountered as far as bosses go. Anyway, when the nucleus spins around in the water, it will create a whirlpool which results in a tentacle rising up. It's easy to avoid because it moves slow, but if it grabs you then, well, you already know what happens, but you can deflect its lunge with your shield, but sometimes the tentacle will disappear back down into the water, and other times it will attempt to attack you again,
said Spike.
There has to be a way to get at that nucleus, I said. You'll need to somehow pull it out of the water where it will be vulnerable to attack,
said Spike.
The long shot,
I exclaimed.
Now this is where things are going to become tricky for you. The long shot can only pull Morpha's nucleus towards you and nothing more, as the weapon is too weak to be able to damage it properly, so you will need to rely on using the Master Sword this time, even though you don't quite know how to use it that well. Do not touch the nucleus or even allow it to touch you, for it can hurt pretty badly. Oh, and before I forget about it, once you've damaged Morphe's nucleus a few times, a second tentacle is going to start showing up, so you need to watch your front and your back, otherwise you'll be caught in the middle," said Spike. "I was afraid you would say the Master Sword," I sighed. Despite Morpha being what it is, the number of attacks that it has are really limited compared to other monsters. All I can suggest to you is watch the nucleus carefully, and pull it out whenever it is riding back and forth along a tentacle, as that will be your best opportunity to get it. Oh, and I hope that you can switch between the long shot and the Master Sword seamlessly, because Morpha isn't going to wait around for you to strike its nucleus," said Spike. Using the Divine Blade was never an option for me because of not really knowing how to use it properly, but that excuse wasn't going to work anymore, as Pinkie Pie taught me some basics. This time, I had to use the sword, so long as I don't end up transforming, as that wouldn't be a good thing. The nucleus of Morpha started to bounce around again, and it made me think that perhaps it was a little too carefree, as I believed it could be pulled towards me while airborne, but I don't have that kind of skill to even attempt such a tactic. Once it bounced around a few times, it started to spin in the water, which meant it was creating a whirlpool which would lead into the tentacle rising up and attempting to attack. "Okay, it's beginning the whirlpool making phase," I said. "If you want an easier time pulling out the nucleus, stand either side when the tentacle comes at you, for trying to pull it while it's directly in front of you is going to be extremely difficult," said Spike. As soon as the tentacle formed, I got the long shot ready as well as the Hylian shield to protect myself, and then it lunged at me, where I fired the long shot through the water, but I couldn't catch the nucleus, so I tried it again and failed. Then, I made a third attempt, only to wind up getting caught by the tentacle wrapping itself around my legs before lifting me up and flung me across the room after it shook me around for a few moments. "That didn't work," I moaned. "It might take one attempt, or several, to pull the nucleus towards you," said Spike. "If only I could pull it towards me while it's in the air, but I lack the skill to do that properly," I sighed. "You're still learning how to use a lot of your items, Sunset Shimmer, so don't sell yourself short because of that. Just stick with what you know, and hopefully it will produce the results you're looking for," said Spike. He certainly had a lot of faith in me, so I need to have that same kind of faith as well. Morpha's nucleus soon began its routine, which made me realize that he was right in that it has few attacks at its disposal, so when the tentacle came at me again, I fired the long shot only to miss, connecting the first two tries, but the third pulled it to me, where I struggled to switch over to the Master Sword. By the time I drew it from the scabbard, the nucleus was bouncing back into the water, so I tried to swing at it only to drop the sword on the ground. "I knew that was going to happen," I sighed. "Why not aim with one hand and swing with the other?"
asked Spike.
"I'm right-handed, so I'd be even worse than I already am with the left," I replied. "Then we're in trouble, as you don't have a fairy or anything to heal the damage, and you transforming wouldn't do you any good, as your body may not be willing to endure another change just a short time after the previous one. The only other suggestion I can think of would be if you were to have the long shot held by your weaker hand when swinging with the Master Sword, and when using the long shot, you could be holding the sword in your teeth, for example." "I know that sounds incredibly stupid considering it is a sacred blade, but you need to do something," said Spike. His idea actually didn't sound as stupid as he was making it out to be, so I decided to hold the sword in my mouth so as to make switching a bit easier for me. The Master Sword wasn't as heavy as I thought it would be, but it was enough to knock me off balance, so it was a struggle for me to keep upright,
and here's hoping that I don't drop it in the water or anything. Was all I could say.
You actually went and did what I said was stupid. Let's hope it works,
said Spike. When the nucleus created the whirlpool and began to roll back and forth along the tentacle, I fired the long shot again where I connected on the second attempt, and as soon as I pulled it over to me, I grabbed the long shot with my left hand, and the master's sword with my right, where I managed to strike it a few times before it bounced back into the water.
Hey, so this unorthodox style actually does work, although it does affect your balance.
I said as I placed the sword back in my mouth and waited for Morpha to attack again. I should have been watching my behind as another tentacle reared up without anything moving through it when it lunged, and once again I found myself being shaken about before being thrown to the other side of the room. I was lucky that I didn't drop the sword, as that would have been a disaster. Now I had two tentacles, leaving me to guess which one I had to focus on when Morpha's nucleus was rolling through it. It was right around here that I took notice of the sound that was being made whenever whirlpools were being created, and it actually got really annoying after hearing them for the 10th time or so. One tentacle popped up and the nucleus was rolling along it, but the other one also came up and struck me without grabbing me, but as I turned around, the first one got me and I was flung over to the other side.
Focus as best as you can as one or two more of those flinging attacks, and that will be the end of you,
said Spike. I said.
No, I wouldn't jump into the middle of the water via those platforms, as that would make things even harder for you, for Morpha's nucleus would pick you off before you even have a chance to react. Stick with what you're doing, and have some more confidence in your skills, as you can do anything if you put your mind to it,
replied Spike. As it bounced around again in an attempt to mock me, Morpha started its usual attack, but this time for some reason, the second tentacle was much further away, and that was the one where the nucleus was. Since the long shot had a much longer chain than the hook shot, I could just stand where I was, and fire at it from here. I managed to pull the nucleus towards me in one attempt, where I did my unusual tactic by switching my items, and I damaged Morpha a few more times. That's when the first tentacle grabbed me and swung me around a few times before throwing me to the other side of the room again, and this time I dropped the master's sword where it landed right on the edge of the water.
Shoot!
I exclaimed.
Better grab it before it falls in,
shouted Spike.
No need to tell me twice,
I said as I ran over to the edge to pick it up, only for a tentacle to come flying at me, which I jumped back to avoid it, but the resulting impact sent the sword flying over to the corner of the room, which was both a blessing and a curse. I ran over again and picked it up before something else could go wrong, but that was when a tentacle grabbed me again. Spike said that I could only take one or two more attacks in this manner before I'm done for, and I have no means of healing, so I needed to break free of this before I get lifted up and tossed like a piece of garbage. Since the master's sword was now in my right hand, I decided to swing at the tentacle as I had nothing else I could use, and somehow I chopped it off, allowing myself to escape for the moment.
Pretty impressive,
commented Spike. I said after placing the sword back in my mouth. Morpha then quickly raised another tentacle as soon as that one went down, so I raised my shield, which was on my left arm, and I deflected several of its attacks as I needed to catch my breath after almost getting killed. Once I was feeling okay again, I waited for another tentacle to show up with the nucleus traveling along it, and when it happened I fired the long shot and pulled it towards me after the third attempt. I hit it a few more times where it bounced back into the water, but then it suddenly appeared on the other tentacle, which was right behind me. I guess it wanted to finish things, so I fired again and pulled Morpha's nucleus out, although I was a mere step away from being grabbed by the tentacle it was rolling on. When I hit the nucleus again, it suddenly shattered to pieces as though it were some kind of bubble, and I dropped the Master Sword to the floor as I was surprised that just happened.
I wasn't expecting it to just pop like a bubble. That was probably very anticlimactic unless there's something I'm missing, but I'm glad that the nucleus has been destroyed, so now I need to figure out how to destroy the water form of Morpha. Like I said before, Morpha's true form was that of the nucleus, with the rest of being a means to initiate attacks. Since you just destroyed it, the water isn't able to sustain itself anymore as it needed the nucleus to even exist,"
said Spike.
"What does that even mean?"
I asked.
"Just look at what is happening to the water,"
replied Spike. As I stared at the pool, the water was being funneled up to the ceiling where it was covering it up as much as possible, but then the water started to shrink in size, and eventually it was reduced to the size of a small puddle. Droplets of water had been trickling down from the center of that mass, and soon the final drop fell where it splattered in the now empty pool, which produced a hard container, and one of those portals. Spike then started to move back and forth in sheer joy.
"You did it, Sunset Shimmer! Despite how awkward your fighting style was, you destroyed the curse and proved once again that you are the one destined to save this land. If anything, I just got lucky because I clearly got injured a lot more than I should have,"
I said.
"Can you walk?"
asked Spike.
"I'm not bleeding if that's what you're thinking, but I am feeling really weak due to being thrown around so much. Maybe I'll feel better when I pick up that big heart down there, provided that the drop to the ground below doesn't hurt me,"
I replied. Once I put the Master Sword and the long shot away, I dropped down into the pit where I landed pretty badly, and almost breaking one of my legs in the process. Then I walked slowly to the hard container and picked it up, where I felt the warm glow that occurs when I acquire one. Not only that, but my strength came back to me, and I no longer felt weak. Once I entered the portal, I was whisked away to the Chamber of the Sages, where this time I was to be focusing on the blue-colored groove which represented water. A few moments later, and the designated sage rose up from the groove, and it was none other than Rarity.
"Sunset Shimmer, I would have expected no less from you because I knew that you would finish what we started.
Zora's domain and its people will eventually return to their original state. I don't know how long it's going to take, but do know that it will eventually happen, as these things do take time.
I am so grateful to you for defeating the curse that plagued the Water Temple, that I shall grant you any wish that you desire. Just name it, and it will be yours without fail, darling." "Well, that's what I want to say to you, but I don't think I can offer that now,"
said Rarity.
"What happened to you after that watery tentacle grabbed you?"
I asked.
"When I was dragged down into the vortex, everything went completely dark, and for a while I believed that I had been killed and joined my ancestors. Eventually, a bright light appeared before me which featured the symbol of the Triforce, and I found myself here where I was told to wait for the moment to come when the hero of time shall arrive. That time is now, and I stand here before you having been awoken to my true destiny,"
replied Rarity.
"I'm guessing that you won't be able to return to Hyrule anytime soon because you're needed here, but you'll get used to this place in no time, for you have two others who can show you the way. Fluttershy and Pinkie Pie were awakened before you were, so they have a pretty good idea by now what their purpose is, and they in turn will help you become adjusted so that in turn you can help those who have yet to realize their destiny,"
I said.
"What kind of names are those?"
asked Rarity.
"The names of my friends," those from the human world who are portraying individuals of this world just like you are. While you know yourself as Princess Ruto, I know you as my friend Rarity, which is your real name. While I would explain things to you, deep inside your heart you already are aware of this.
I replied.
Such a name as that will take time for me to grow adjusted to it, but I will acknowledge myself with such a name as a sign of respect to you. I have to guard the water temple as the sage of water. And you? You're searching for the princess, Zelda?
Asked Rarity.
No one knows what became of her when Ganondorf attacked Hyrule Castle, so her fate continues to be a mystery even to this day. While I wish that she were alive, the chances of that happening are pretty slim from what I gather.
I replied.
Princess Zelda. She's alive. I can sense it. So don't be discouraged,
said Rarity.
Seriously?
I asked.
I'm not exactly sure where she is right now, for the darkness that pervades the land remains as strong as ever, but I know she is alive and is waiting for you, so it's just a matter of time, I suppose. Perhaps you may find some better information from someone who was much closer to Zelda, for I am certain they will be able to give you a more desired answer than a simple feeling. Is there anyone you know who fits such a description?
Asked Rarity.
The only person I know who was always by her side was her attendant, Impa, who happens to be a Sheikah,
I replied.
From what I remember about them, they originated from Kakariko village, so perhaps she may have returned there after the castle was taken by Ganondorf 7 years ago,
suggested Rarity.
Sheik may also be able to provide some insight, I said. It looks like you already have your next goal in mind. I can tell that nothing will stop you in your quest for justice and peace. You must take this medallion. Take it respectfully, and know that its power will aid you,
replied Rarity. She raised her arms and another medallion fell from the ceiling where it stopped just slightly above my head, and I was able to grab it and hold it in my hands. This medallion was blue in color, which made sense because it was a representation of water, so I added it to the rest of the ones I had received thus far.
Now is the time for you to return to Hyrule, and continue on your quest. What about your father?
I asked.
The next time you see him, please tell him what has transpired, for he deserves to know the truth. If you see Sheik at some point in your travels, which is sure to happen given that you need her knowledge, I ask you to please give her my thanks, okay? Perhaps one day we shall meet each other again after all of this has been resolved, and peace has been restored to Hyrule,
replied Rarity. As I said my goodbyes and started to make my way back to Lake Hylia through being transported, something was happening back in the room of the water temple where I defeated Sunset Demon. While I believed her to have been destroyed, a shadowy mass appeared in the center of the chamber, which was followed with an arm rising up through the water that swung around a few times to ascertain that things weren't over yet. To be continued. Chapter 40, Broken Armor.